Well, let's be honest, it's officially that part of the week. You know when even the second cup of coffee isn't quite doing the trick.
It's Wednesday, right?
It is Wednesday, and I bet you started your day, like I did, digging into that EQAI morning briefing.
Always a good way to start the day.
It is, although I will say you guys are information junkies, seriously. There's a lot to unpack there.
That's why we're here, right, to help separate the signal from the noise.
Exactly. We brought in an expert, someone who could help us connect the dots, because I was feeling a little lost this morning.
Well, that's what I love to do. Always happy to dive into the latest trends, especially those, those underlying forces that we don't always see in those daily headlines.
Well, speaking of headlines, there's one that really jumped out at me, and it involves a couple of big names in the EV world, GM and Tesla. So it looks like GM's decided to let their EV drivers use Tesla superchargers, which seems a little counterintuitive, like are they helping at the competition?
Yeah, that definitely raised some eyebrows, didn't it? On the surface, it does seem like GM's lending a hand to their rivals, but there's probably a lot more to it, don't you think?
Okay, so break it down for us. What's the strategy here?
Well, think about it. This lets GM instantly expand its charging network, right?
Hmm.
And without the huge costs of building their own infrastructure from scratch. And that's a big deal in an industry that's so capital intensive.
Oh, for sure.
Plus, it positions them as the more, the more consumer-friendly alternative to Tesla. Maybe they could even win over some of those buyers who are still on the fence about making the switch to electric.
So they save money, they appeal to a wider customer base,
Exactly.
and maybe they score a few PR points for, being collaborative.
It's a win-win.
Kind of sneaky. I like it.
And, this whole idea of strategic positioning, it's not just happening in the auto industry, is it? We saw it in the briefing with Intuitive Machines. Their stock is, skyrocketing?
Yeah.
After they landed that huge NASA contract.
Yeah.
Companies, they're making these strategic moves to try to, corner their place in whatever the next big thing is.
Okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here. But the strategic positioning thing, this isn't just for companies, right? Like, what about just regular people, Should we be thinking about this stuff even if we're not building rockets or electric cars?
100%. Yes. Think of it this way.
Hmm.
Your career, it's kind of like your own personal brand, especially these days, in a job market that's constantly evolving,
Yeah.
You need to be strategic about how you're presenting yourself, what makes you stand out.
So instead of saying, hey, I'm good at spreadsheets, I should be asking myself, what skills do I have that nobody else does?
Exactly. What are your strengths, the things you're uniquely good at?
Yeah.
And how can you leverage those in industries that are just emerging?
Ooh, I like that.
Right. It's about staying one step ahead.
And finding those new industries, those new opportunities.
Right.
Which is a perfect segue, actually, because it brings us to another big topic from the briefing, something that's probably on everyone's mind these days. The economy.
Always a hot topic.
Can I just say that sometimes following economic news, it feels like riding a roller coaster, but in the dark.
I know what you mean. There are a lot of twists and turns, a lot of conflicting signals.
Yes. Like today's briefing, right? We've got reports of really strong economic growth, which, okay, good news, right? But then everyone's saying the Fed is going to lower interest rates.
Yeah.
Why lower rates when things are going well? Explain it to me like I'm Well,
they're trying to get ahead of the curve. They're not just reacting to what's happening right now in the economy. They're thinking about what might happen down the road.
So they're being cautious?
Exactly. It's like preventative medicine, but for the economy as a whole.
Yeah.
Right now, it seems like they're more worried about a potential recession than they are about keeping interest rates high.
So better safe than sorry.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does this affect, us, average people trying to figure out our own finances?
Well, one thing the briefing mentioned is that mortgage rates, they're already at their lowest point in a couple of years.
Wow, seriously?
Yeah, and they even mentioned a 14.2% jump, I think, in mortgage applications. So clearly people are taking advantage.
So time to refinance.
But that depends. Everyone's financial situation is different, right? But the briefing did point out that if you have a higher risk tolerance,
Okay.
now might be a good time to invest, maybe before those rates drop even more.
See, this is why I love these deep dives. It's like suddenly all these different things from the news, they start to make sense together.
It's all connected. And that brings us to another interesting point. Lower interest rates, they sound great on the surface, right?
Yeah.
But there's always another side to the story.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, what are the potential downsides of keeping those interest rates low, especially for a long time?
Ooh, good question. This is where those deep dives are really helpful. You need that expert perspective to understand not just the good, but, well, maybe not so good.
Absolutely. And speaking of consequences, another thing that stood out to me was that story about Tupperware.
Oh no, Tupperware filed for bankruptcy.
Yep.
Wow, talk about a blast from the past, huh? It's like everyone had Tupperware growing up. I still have some of those containers at home,
It's
actually.
such an iconic brand, right?
Yeah, totally.
And I think it really shows how much nostalgia plays a role in how we view these companies.
For sure.
But it also speaks to something else. Consumer habits, how much they're changing.
Right. Like reusable containers, everyone's using those now.
Exactly. So even these big, well-known brands, they aren't immune to these shifts in how we think and what we buy.
It's a good reminder to, stay relevant, stay adaptable.
100%. And that actually brings us to another big theme I noticed throughout the briefing. Leadership.
Okay, yeah.
We saw it with that clash at 23 in Hamia.
Yeah. Right, the resignations.
Yeah. And then there's John Paulson making those statements about, well, we all know.
About the vice president, yeah.
And even Richard Branson getting involved in activism, speaking out against the death penalty. It's like everyone's watching how these leaders are reacting to, well, everything, really.
It's true. Leadership is a hot topic. I mean, we see it everywhere. From business to politics, it's all about leadership.
It is, and it raises such a good question. In the age of information overload, right, how much weight should we be giving to what these big names say and do? I mean, should we just accept their opinions because they're, well, who they are? Or should we be more critical?
That's a tough one. Especially with how much information is out there. It's hard to know who to trust. It's like we need a filter, for all the opinions and hot takes.
We do.
Yeah.
And it's not even just about, like you said, who to trust, but it's also about understanding the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Like, what are the motivations behind what someone is saying? What are they not saying?
Right. Exactly. And that takes us to, well, another big topic from the briefing, one where we definitely need those alarm bells going off.
Let me guess. AI.
Ding, ding, ding. We've got a winner. It seems like AI is everywhere we turn these days.
It's kind of unavoidable, right?
Right. And I think a lot of people still think of it as like robots and self-driving cars and, replacing our jobs.
Which, I mean, is part of it.
Sure.
Right?
But the thing that really struck me, especially with Mark Benioff's comments, was the potential of AI to actually solve problems.
Yeah, he had some interesting stuff to say about their new product, Agent Force.
Yes. And it sounds like Jim Cramer thinks it could be huge for customer service in all kinds of industries.
It's interesting, right? Because we're not just talking about, lines of code. We're talking about how AI can affect people, real people, in their everyday lives.
Which brings us back to Benioff's whole point, right? He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but could AI actually lead to better healthcare?
Interesting question. I mean, I know a lot of people would say the healthcare system could use some improvement, right?
You think? Imagine, AI helping people navigate all the insurance stuff, the appointments, all of it.
That would be amazing, honestly.
Right. It could be revolutionary.
It could be. But we also have to think about the other side of that coin. What are the downsides? What about access? Who gets to benefit from this technology?
That's the thing with all this new technology, right? We have to be smart about how we use it.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap things up, don't you?
I think so. We covered a lot today.
We did. Everything from like Tesla and GM duking it out to the Fed trying to, predict the future.
And don't forget poor Tupperware.
Oh yeah, R.I.P. Tupperware. But seriously, folks, we hope this deep dive gave you something to think about.
It's all about staying curious, right?
100%. Now, for our listeners, we want to hear from you. What do you think about AI in healthcare? Good idea? Recipe for disaster? Head over to our social media. Let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, stay sharp.